Dr. Jane Morgan is the Executive Director for Piedmont Healthcare's COVID Task Force. She joins me here in Atlanta. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you, Rosemary, for having me.
So, of course, sadly, we know the daily death toll from COVID-19 has been just below 2,000. Hospitalizations across the country have put doctors and nurses in dire circumstances, sometimes having to choose which patients to save. But the most frustrating part of where things currently stand in this country is the fact that we have access to vaccinations for COVID, but these patients choose not to get it. How do your colleagues feel about that and the burnout and staffing shortages that they're also facing?
You know, Rosemary, that's such a great question. We're in this fourth surge, and this is our first surge that has been entirely preventable, where we have had not only vaccines available, but vaccines readily available and plentiful. So this has certainly been a bit more of a psychological strain. I think, people are beginning to talk about, compassion fatigue syndrome. And what do we see in physicians and nurses and others who are on the front line? And certainly it can be discomforting, discouraging to admit these patients, treat these patients, manage these patients, many of whom will be quite sick. And then you leave the hospital and you see people right outside your hospital on the sidewalks, at stores, without masks, without social distancing. And literally, you've been putting your life on the line for the entire day. So I think we're beginning to write about this compassion fatigue syndrome in this fourth surge, a year and a half into this pandemic. And what does that really mean on the psyche and the mental and emotional state of people who are there risking their lives to make certain that they can save yours?
Yeah, totally understandable. Of course, we all heard the story of the young boy whose appendix burst while he was waiting for a bed because the hospital was full of unvaccinated COVID patients, or the cancer patients who had to be turned away because they couldn't get access to a bed. At what point does this become untenable when COVID patients who have chosen not to get vaccinated take up valuable beds and put the lives of others at risk?
And I think, you're getting at the unconscionable, and something that we really never anticipated that we were going to face. And that's part of that compassion fatigue syndrome as well. Where does empathy begin to wane as people become weary of continuing to fight and move this forward? And when this is all said and done, and we're on the other side of this pandemic in some form or another, I think the true death toll from this COVID pandemic will be far greater than the numbers that we are counting now, because they will include all of the ancillary people who died, who did not have COVID, but who were blocked or chose to stay home, to stay safe instead of seeking medical care at hospitals because we were in this COVID pandemic. Those numbers, I suspect, will be astronomical and staggering.
So how do you convince those 80 million or so Americans who still have decided they're not ready to take the shot, or they never want to take the shot? How do you convince those people?
We have, different buckets, and we certainly have this anti-government group that's following a specific ideology. And certainly they're going to be more difficult to reach when you are following a specific type of culture. Because ration and reason don't necessarily fit in there. But then you have others as well who really just don't trust the science. And how are you going to manage that? I think as we move forward, and a couple of things. One, we begin to have vaccine mandates at corporations, in government agencies, at schools, then people will have to either step up and be vaccinated or choose to be unemployed. And I think that is a strong motivator for many as well. We may begin to see the travel industry also begin to require that for people who are traveling. That will be another strong motivator. And so I am hoping bit by bit we can get there. We have a saying, how do you eat an elephant? You eat an elephant one bite at a time. And that's what we're trying to do to move that forward.
Absolutely. Dr. Jane Morgan, a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rosemary. It's a pleasure.